Mr Speaker.
I call Alfred Naro.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise and take a call on this first reading of the Children, Young Persons and Their Families Advocacy, Workforce and Age Settings Amendment Bill. Mr Speaker, I look forward to this coming to our Select Committee and the work that we will do. Mr Speaker, I see that this bill is quite critically important to the roles of responsibility that the government has. And in particular, this morning at our Select Committee, we had the Minister present, and one of the questions that was asked and was responded to by the officials was to talk about the reviews that had taken place. In fact, one of the officials said that since 2000 there had been 14 reviews, and at each review there had been a layer of complexity and also to more sort of bureaucracy that had been added on to the department, which made it inefficient to be able to fulfil its role. And I think that's quite critically important to this piece of legislation. This piece of legislation, Mr Speaker, is a direct response to some of those critical issues, and I'll talk about them in a moment. The bill has three main objectives. The first objective inside the bill is to extend the statutory age of care and protection to under 18 from what was previously 17. And as the previous member spoke about, that's something that has been talked about under this government. It's something that we're actually enacting and initiating very clearly. One of the things I think it's important is that I was present when we actually in the 50th Parliament, when we had a presentation from the Dingwall Trust and a number of young people that actually were in care. They talked about the importance for them to have the age of entitlement and eligibility extended, because for a number of them, Mr Speaker, they talked about the challenges, the difficulty that they had in order to transition from the age of 17 and to be able to get into some training, some employment. So for them, this was critically important. I hope that those young people will hear that this government is actually now taking on that responsibility, is extending the age to 18. But the other thing I want to also give comfort to others that may be listening is that while other people say, well, 18 maybe is not enough, it could be higher, it could be up to 19, 20 and 21. Well, it is clear, there is a provision, it has always been there, that if the Chief Executive deems that actually there are critical issues of concern and vulnerability, the Chief Executive can extend that. It can even currently now be extended up to the age of 25. So that provision is currently there. That hasn't changed. What has changed and will change under this bill is to extend that age of statutory care to the age of 18. The second part that I think is really important, Mr Speaker, inside the bill is around the voice of the vulnerable children, the voice of children being included. Mr Speaker, in August of 2015, we had a report by the Children's Commissioner, which was a pretty damning report, if I want to be honest about it. It talked about, I suppose, now part of the statutory role of the Children's Commissioner is to monitor the roles of responsibility for the children and young persons and their families. And in the report in August, called the State of Care 2015, he wrote a number of things. One of the things that inside of the report that was critical was the lack of ability for the voice of children and young people to be in the decision making of the department and all the decisions that actually reflect on the children themselves. And that was quite clear. In fact, what that said was this: give them a voice in decisions about their care, and crucially allow those voices to be part in the implementation. That's quite critically important as well. Mr Speaker, I think that's quite critically important. So the second provision in this is to ensure that the voice of children is included inside of that, and I think that's quite critically important. Mr Speaker, also too in the expert panel report, and if one reads inside of that, so there's on average there's about 60,000 children that are notified to the department for SIPs. 4,900 of those children are actually in state care. And so out of that, Mr Speaker, what's actually come out is that the Minister has seen in her wisdom to ensure that we have those key stakeholders involved with the expert panel. And what came out of that, and I just want to read that, and that goes to the second part of the objectives of the bill, is that a young person wrote to the Minister a particular letter as part of those key stakeholders and said this: Dear Honourable Anne Tolley, when you read the final report over Christmas, I'd most like you to think about the importance of advocacy for children in state care. It goes on to talk about their own experiences being one in which they didn't have the roles of advocacy inside of that. So, Mr Speaker, the second part of the bill ensures and provides for vulnerable children and young people with the support to express their views, to have them heard both at the individual and system level. The last part of the third part of the objective of this bill, Mr Speaker, is ensure that we enable a broader range of professionals that will also identify and meet the needs of vulnerable children. We know that the previous speaker talked about the roles of the social worker, but also too what did come out of the Children's Commissioner's report is the fact that there was an issue around the capacity and capability of social workers and the roles that they played as well, Mr. Speaker. So we're not criticising that. I think there are issues that for us to be able to ensure that the burden of responsibility should not just be put on the role of the social worker. The third portion of this bill ensures that there may be a broader range of specialists who have an ability to be able to meet some of those needs. They could be in the areas of, for instance, mental health areas of need. There could be counselling and other forms of specialist support that could be offered as well, and that's the third component of the objectives of this bill as well. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to this bill coming to our Select Committee and to the submissions that will be made. Again, this is the initiative of the government to ensure that as part of the overhaul, to look at the system, to ensure that it does respond, it's fully inclusive of all the key stakeholders, and I think that's critically important, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think that what we have done in this bill and what the Minister has taken is critically important. The last thing I want to say that comes in the expert panel in their consultation right across is that this part of the recommendations that has now been factored into the bill has factored all of those key stakeholders that are involved. None have been left behind. The voice of families, the voice of children, the voice of young people, also to the professional perspectives that have come from the social workers, counsellors, those that are also policymakers. Mr. Speaker, I think that the approach that it's taking is thorough. I think it's well considered. I look forward to this coming to the committee. I commend this bill to the House.
Mr. Speaker.